Hello, friend. Oi, amigo. Oi, amiga. Welcome to this lesson of Welsh Inglês Técnico. This is the lesson Fractions and Percentage, ou Frações e Porcentagem. In this lesson, we will review in English what these fractions and percentages are, how we read and write them, and how we use them. Agora vamos lembrar que essa é a versão do vídeo que é só em inglês. Depois dessa pequena apresentação agora no início, o resto é só em inglês. Existe a outra versão onde eu apresento essa mesma matéria em inglês, mas já com as dicas, pronúncias e explicações em português. In this lesson, we will look at three topics. We will look at fractions, ratios, and percentages. What is a fraction? Let's look at an easy definition. A fraction represents equal parts of a whole thing. Again, a fraction represents equal parts of a whole thing. So, for example, if we divide something, in this case a circle, into 4 equal parts, we can use a fraction to represent any number of those parts. So we can represent 1 part out of 4 equal parts, or 2 parts out of 4 equal parts, or 3 parts out of 4, or the whole thing 4 out of 4, 4 parts out of 4 equal parts. We use fractions to represent that. Of course, you are familiar with fractions, and you know that fractions are represented with one number on top of another number. You see that we call the top number the numerator and the bottom number the denominator. These are separated by a horizontal line or fraction line. We can also represent fractions with this notation, number slash number, numerator slash denominator. Slash is the little diagonal line. The role of the denominator is to tell us how many equal parts we are dividing the whole into. In our example, we divided the whole circle into 4 equal parts, so we put 4 in the denominator. The top number, the numerator, has a different role. It enumerates or counts how many of those parts we want to talk about. Now let's turn our attention to reading fractions. Reading fractions. How do we say the fraction when we see it on the paper? Well, it's easiest if we think of the top number as cardinal and the bottom number ordinal. Cardinal over ordinal. That means that when we say the numerator, we say it as a cardinal number. When we say the denominator, we say it as an ordinal number. Remember cardinals? Cardinal numbers are those that we use to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. Ordinal numbers are those that we use to show the order. 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and so on. Now, one more thing. In most cases, the ordinal number in the denominator is plural form. The plural form. So let's look at a few examples. 2 over 5. How do we say that? 2 over 5. 2 fifths. 2 fifths. Cardinal, ordinal. In its plural form. 2 fifths. So you see the S in the end to make it plural. Another example. 7 over 16. 7 over 16 is 7/16. 7/16. Cardinal over ordinal in the plural form. Some more examples. 11 over 32. We say 11 because that's the cardinal form. 32, what's its ordinal? 32nd. Plural, 30 seconds. So we have 11 30-seconds. Finally, 21 over 100, we say 21 hundredths. 21 hundredths. So I said usually in the plural form for the denominator. How do we know? When do we use plural? When do we use singular? Well, the only exception is if the numerator is 1. If the numerator is 1, the denominator is singular. So we would have 1/5, 1/16, 1/32, 1/100th, all in the singular. Now we just talked about the pattern of how we usually read fractions. But there are two exceptions, two numbers that have special names, special ways of reading them. That's when the denominator is 2 or the denominator is 4. If the denominator is 2, we have the special name half. Half, H-A-L-F, half. That's because if we cut a whole thing, a circle, a pizza, an apple, into 2 equal parts, those 2 equal parts are called halves, and each one is called 1/2. So, if we see the fraction 1 over 2, we read it 1/2. 1/2. We don't read it 1 second. So it doesn't follow the pattern. We don't read it 1 second. We read it 1/2. If we see 3 over 2, it's 3 halves. Halves is the plural of half. 3 halves. The other case is when the denominator is 4. When the denominator is 4, we can follow the pattern and say 1/4, 1/4, or 3/4, 1/4, 3/4. With 4, we can follow the pattern. However, there's another name that we use often that is quarter instead of 4th, quarter. So we can say 1/4 or 3/4. 1/4, 3/4. And we use that very often. So 1/4, 1/4, same thing. 3/4, 3/4, same thing. Now there's another special case, and this is the case when the numerator has the value 1. If the numerator is 1, then we have the choice of how we say it. We can choose to say 1, or we can say the letter A, pronounced So if we see 1 over 2, we can say 1/2, 1/2, or we can say a half, a half. If we see 1 over 10, we can say 1/10 or a tenth. If we see 1 over 12, it's 1/12 or a 12th. It's our choice, whichever one we want. They are the same thing. They are equivalent. Now let's look at some of the names that we give different types of fractions. First, if we have a fraction like 4 over 5 or 4/5, we see that the numerator is smaller than the denominator. This kind of fraction we call a proper fraction. Proper fraction. Numerator is less than, smaller than the denominator. And we can use it to represent something that is less than the whole thing. Something that is less than a whole thing. On the other hand, if we have a fraction such as 12 over 5, where the numerator is larger than the denominator, we have an improper fraction. Improper fraction is not a proper fraction. And we can use it to represent something that is more than a whole thing. Now, if the improper fraction is such that the numerator is a multiple of the denominator, for example, 9/3, 9/3, we call it an apparent fraction. It appears to be a fraction, but it is also just a whole number, an integer. 9/3 is really just 3. Finally, if we join a fraction to an integer, we have a mixed number. In this example, we have the mixed number 3 2/5. 3 2/5, which we can rewrite or convert to 17/5. It's the same thing. Now, we can also give names to fractions when we compare them to each other. For example, these fractions here are equivalent fractions. Equivalent fractions have the same value when they are simplified. Again, equivalent fractions have the same value when we simplify them. We will review simplification later on. Or, if we look at the denominators of fractions and they are all the same, if they are alike, then we call them like fractions. Like fractions have the same number in the denominator. If we look at the denominators and they are different, then they are unlike fractions. Unlike fractions have different numbers in the denominators. And then there are reciprocal fractions. If we have a fraction, 2/5, its reciprocal is another fraction with those same numbers, but reversed, upside down. So if we switch the numerator and denominator, we get a reciprocal of the first fraction. Reciprocals are interesting because when we multiply them together, the result is always 1. In this next section, we will look at percentages. Percentages. A percentage is a special fraction whose denominator is 100. Again, a percentage is a special fraction whose denominator is 100. So, for example, the fraction 1/100 can be read as 1%. 1 out of 100. 1 out of 100. We call it 1%. There's a special symbol that you see there, and that's the percent sign. So we can read these percentages as follows: 0%, 25%, 50%, 75%, or 100%. Let's talk just a little bit about ratios. A ratio is the comparison of two or more numbers. And we can use ratios to talk about the relative size of dimensions. So, for example, if we have a box and we measure the 3 dimensions of the box, the length, the width, and the height, we could say that the ratio of these dimensions is 7:2:3. That shows that the length is much longer than the width or the height. Or we could use a ratio when we're speaking about the profits of a company and how they are shared between 4 partners. If the ratio of profit sharing between the 4 partners is 4:3:2:1, then obviously one partner is getting 4 parts. One partner is only getting 1 part. The ratio expresses that comparison. Or finally, if there's a school that has both boys and girls, we could say that the ratio of girls to boys is 1:3. Now we've arrived at the end of this lesson. And of course, in this lesson, we looked at 3 topics. We spoke about fractions, percentages, and ratios. Então, agora já é hora de você assistir a essa mesma matéria na outra versão, no vídeo que tem essa matéria em inglês, mas já com as pronúncias, dicas e explicações em português. Ao terminar aquela versão, você volta, assiste essa de novo e ver se dá para captar mais, entender mais. E, quando você tenta pronunciar, se sai mais naturalmente, tá? I always have fun spending time with you in these lessons. I hope they are helpful to you. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.